Welcome to Mom and Mind, where we dive into all aspects of perinatal mental health and wellness related to pregnancy, birth, loss, postpartum, and new parenthood. It's so much more than postpartum depression. We raise the volume on all of these topics in the hopes that someday everyone will have the support and info that they deserve before they need it. Please note this podcast is not a replacement for treatment by a professional or professional training. Welcome to Mom and Mind. I'm your host, Dr. Kat. In this episode, we are going to be taking a closer look at what it's like to be a therapist going through your own perinatal mental health challenge. And really, very specifically, we're going to be talking about what it's like to be dealing with infertility as a therapist while you're being a therapist. Bridget Cross is coming on to share her story. She's a licensed clinical social worker, a certified perinatal mental health professional, and a mom of 2 daughters. She lives in Savannah, Georgia, and works in a private practice providing individual, family, and group therapy to new, hopeful, and expectant moms. She's also a volunteer coordinator for the Georgia chapter of Postpartum Support International and a member of the Maternal Mental Health Collective of Savannah. Bridget's passion is supporting women in all phases of life, but especially as they encounter and cope with the transition to motherhood. Some of the things specifically that she'll touch on is what it's like to work as a therapist with pregnant and postpartum moms when going through infertility, and what it was like to work with the perinatal population when going through her own pregnancy and postpartum period. I know this can affect quite a few of us who specialize. We are all still human, even though we are therapists. Yes, we can hold space and do a lot for people, even while we are dealing and suffering through our own things. So let's hear from Bridget. Welcome, Bridget. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Kat.
Yeah, I would love to have you just start wherever you're comfortable with your story, and we'll go from there.
Sure. Yeah. So I have 2 daughters. They are 5 and 2. And before I had my first daughter, my partner and I tried and failed to get pregnant for about 3.5 years. So we tried quite a bit on our own. We did a bunch of IUIs and then eventually landed on IVF. And we were hugely fortunate because I got pregnant on our first try of IVF and had just really healthy, problem-free, kind of amazing pregnancy. So it was sort of like this reward after all of the things that we'd been through getting there. And then similarly, I also just felt really fortunate that I had like a pretty beautiful and perfect birth with my oldest daughter. It was really like everything that I wanted it to be. I felt fully supported and cared for by my partner and my doula and the medical team, my OB, and it was sort of like everything kind of unfolding basically as I'd always hoped after all of this time going to get there. But then pretty much right after, and I would say kind of starting during labor itself, I just became consumed with like crippling anxiety, anger, really intense kind of intrusive negative thoughts, feeling just so panicked really about just the whole situation of feeling like, who is this baby? Who am I? What am I going to do? How am I going to take care of her? This was a total mistake. Like really just feeling the intensity of like kind of remorse and terror about all of it. And that was obviously really disturbing to me. And I think I wrote it off at the time as just, you're tired, you're exhausted, it's hormones, whatever. Everyone around me is kind of celebrating this victory. Everyone in my life had been really so supportive of our kind of fertility treatment process and my pregnancy. And, for every single person in my life, my partner and me included, this was only supposed to be joyful and amazing and miraculous and a blessing and all of this. And the fact that pretty much from the moment they put her on me, I felt kind of the opposite was just completely devastating to me on every level. So I basically dealt with that by kind of pushing myself into total denial about it, despite, having worked as a mental health professional for, almost 10 years at that point,
Mm.
Despite, everything that I knew about, my own experiences of depression in the past. And, I knew that postpartum depression was a thing. I didn't really know that much about it, but I
Mm.
certainly knew that could be a possibility,
Right.
but I just couldn't face it. I
Mm-hmm.
think I felt so much of, what our clients feel, this kind of shame around it of,
Yeah.
I'm a horrible mother if I feel this way. I'm a horrible woman, look at everything I went through and I'm so ungrateful. And so many people didn't get to have the success that I did and
Mm-hmm.
all of that shame. And then also a big piece of it that I think so many people who work as mental health clinicians feel, which is like, I should be better than this. Like,
Yeah.
I should be stronger than this. I know what's what. I
Mm-hmm.
work with mentally ill people. I'm, the therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, and on top of that, like I've been in therapy for like a good chunk of my life. Like, what's
Right.
wrong with me that I can't deal with this? And then two, in my relationship with my partner, I kind of have that role of being sort of, my partner is not a mental health professional. And in a lot of ways, I think in our relationship, I'm kind of the one who like knows what to do and the one who sort of takes care of people's feelings and has a sense of when things are going wrong emotionally, like, what do you do?
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that I was really for the first time in my life in this space of complete like fear and panic and not knowing what to do and feeling like everything is all wrong and I can't let anyone know
Yeah.
was just like the worst.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think for the first few weeks, it showed up mainly as anxiety. I mean, intense sleep deprivation and then anxiety. I had a lot of trouble breastfeeding, which is like its
Mm-hmm.
own intense stress.
Yeah. Right.
And then all the kind of, you know, consulting with a million different people about that and just kind of running myself ragged so that by the end of maybe the first month or so, I just was in like deep, dark depression. I was
Mm-hmm.
crying all day, every day. I was not wanting to be with the baby, but also not wanting to let anyone hold her.
Right.
I like couldn't say that she was my daughter or that I was a mother. I kept doing that thing of saying the baby. And yeah, just feeling terrible, having awful thoughts. I was self harming. I was feeling suicidal. It was just awful. Couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, and really just not sharing any of it at all. And I started to really like withdraw. I completely withdrew from my partner. I stopped
Mm-hmm.
really talking with friends, going out. And I think because people, are sort of busy with their own lives and have their own expectations of, what the first few months with a baby should be, I think nobody was really noticing. And, unfortunately, I think when my partner noticed, it was when it kind of got directed negatively toward him.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of got to just hide out in that for a long time.
This is months at this time.
Months, yeah. I had a lot of also just kind of external stressors at the time. I
Mm-hmm.
had gone back to work briefly and then I was laid off. And then
Oh.
my partner's job was not working out. And then our housing situation was unstable. And then we ended up moving to a new city in a new state that was very unfamiliar to me. I'm from New York City and I've lived there most of my life. And we moved to Savannah, Georgia, which is
Oh,
sort
it's very
of
different.
shockingly different. And, I don't know we didn't really know anyone here. And we moved here when my daughter was about 9 months. And
Oh,
so,
wow.
yeah, it was like all of this had been just kind of bubbling and the external circumstances also, I think, kind of exacerbated it, but also kind of covered it up because I could
Oh,
say, well,
right, right.
I'm just stressed out because I'm not working.
Uh-huh.
I'm just
Yeah.
stressed out because we're moving. And, we're fighting a lot because, we have to pack and
Mm-hmm.
we live in a studio apartment. Like, it was a lot of that. Um,
Totally.
and I think once we moved, it was sort of like really facing it of like, okay, this is not good and something's got to change with me.
Mm-hmm.
So a big piece of that for me was going back to work. So I started building a small private practice here in Savannah, just kind of general adult mental health, which is what I'd been doing before in New York. And for the first time, got a babysitter. I'd never left my daughter for more than maybe like an hour to go
Sure.
out to the store. So
So
getting a
this is,
babysitter, yeah.
sorry, this is like,
No,
you moved after 9 months, after she was nine
I
months?
moved around 9 months. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So it was kind of starting between, say, like 9 months and a year was like
Oh,
when I
okay.
get back to work. Yeah.
Right. Right.
So like finally being able to like get some space from her and go to yoga again and do some things that felt like, oh, right, these are these things that I like to do.
Mm-hmm.
That obviously helped a lot. But then maybe a little bit after she turned a year, maybe 13, 14 months or so, I decided to start doing some training in perinatal mental health. So I signed up for the PSI training that was online.
Mm-hmm.
It's like an 8 week long course or something. And, it's funny, like looking back at it because, it obviously was something that interested me, but I really think that I was pursuing that,
Mm-hmm.
like to learn how to support and treat women who were going through perinatal mood and anxiety disorders
Mm-hmm.
because I needed that too.
At that point, when you started pursuing that training, was it clear to you that that's what you were dealing with?
I think it was more clear, but I remember sitting in my kitchen listening to the first session. It's like a 2 hour long session or something. I think it was
Mm-hmm.
Wendy Davis from PSI presenting, just kind of giving an overview and just sitting there and like weeping with
Oh,
just
yeah.
like total, like sorrow and like grief,
Yeah.
but also like total relief and recognition
Oh
of
my
like
gosh. Yeah.
of like I kind of realized that like on some level, I've known, but like I hadn't given myself permission
Oh,
to like name it or experience it really. And so having it within this context of like this is a professional training, it's like something that's kind of speaking to my like professional self,
mm-hmm.
but also is so deeply personal in a way that I've never felt before. Um,
Right.
just it was like a whole world exploded to me.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking like, I had thought this was a training I'll take, and I'm sure I'll see some pregnant women or postpartum women sometime because I had already, and it seemed like
Mm-hmm.
a good skill to have. But it was through doing that I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Like,
Yeah.
this is going to be like my focus. And I remember talking to a friend of mine who's a therapist about it, and she was like, don't you think it's going to be hard though to, you know, see women who like have been through infertility or who are doing IVF or who have had postpartum depression or relationship problems because of postpartum depression? Like, isn't that going to be really hard for you because it's so close? And I remember thinking like, yeah, it might be really hard. I think I just have to do it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And, that over that next year or so after that first training, I kind of just like became a sponge and like read everything I could read and like did all the trainings and read all the Karen Kleiman and, you know, read all the research and the blogs and things and just sort of immersed myself in it. And kind of meanwhile continuing to build my practice here in Savannah. And eventually I then decided to have another baby.
Okay.
And had my
If
son.
I can ask some
Yeah,
questions about
sure.
your initial experience, was there anybody asking you how you were doing? Really, like medical providers, and anybody that you
Yeah,
had contact with?
I did go to my 6 week checkup and met with the nurse practitioner at my OB's office that, I had known and really liked. And she did screen me. I think she did talk to me in pretty great detail about how I was feeling. And I was a mess. And I remember feeling really ashamed and
Mm-hmm.
wanting to fill out my screening, honestly, because
Yep.
I knew what the score should be. So I just made it
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And then, it was at that point, you're 6 weeks in, someone asks you how you're feeling, you kind of burst into tears because you
Mm-hmm.
can't not. And I think I just really covered up. I was like, it's the breastfeeding. It's the breastfeeding. I'm just
Uh-huh.
tired. It's the
Yeah.
breastfeeding. I think she was very supportive and understanding. She gave me time. She did listen. She did ask questions, which I now know is not the case a lot of the time.
Right.
So I do feel glad that she did and fortunate that she did. But I think she also knew that I was a mental health professional.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of like well, you're good. You'll
Yeah.
tell me if you're not good.
Yeah. That's what I was curious about, and that I've been hearing and seeing more often, is that there's an assumption too, like it's a little bit double-sided for us, that as a mental health professional, even though people don't really want to talk about their mental health, if we're dealing with something, people assume that we've got it.
Yeah, you've got it. Like you know what it looks like when it's not okay. So
Right.
like I'll take your lead
Mm-hmm.
on it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, as I think like for many people who go into this field, that's kind of like my role in a lot of my relationships
Mm-hmm.
is like,
Mm-hmm.
you've got it. You'll let me know if you need help. And I'm like, sure. But then I don't
Right.
actually
Right.
let you know.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Yep.
So there wasn't anyone necessarily saying like, no, you're not okay. Or even just like, I can tell you're not okay. Like, can you tell me more honestly what's
Mm-hmm.
going on? I
Mm-hmm.
think the closest person who was doing that was my partner, who was certainly aware that I wasn't okay and I think very disturbed by it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think because he was also struggling with that and just with the adjustment, I kind of wanted to like protect him from how
Yeah.
awful I was feeling. And so it was just like, no, I'll be fine. Like,
Right.
I got this. I just need to sleep more.
Mm-hmm.
The first year is always hard, this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's really common too, like protecting the
Mhm.
partner. If you're like,
Totally.
you can kind of secretly know something's not quite right, but it's hard to admit to yourself and admit to other people, and what are
Right.
they going to think?
Right. And I
All
think,
of that.
since I'm the one who's kind of supposed to know, like,
Mm-hmm.
I know how to deal with stuff,
Mm-hmm.
what does he do then if I'm like, you know what, I'm going to fall apart?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I know a little better now that he can handle it in a way that I did not know then. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
It's
That's lucky.
hard. It is. But I think it's also hard to imagine that anybody else could handle something that feels so horrible to you.
Right.
Because,
Because like I couldn't handle it. So why
right,
could somebody else? And I can handle a lot. So
right.
like why could anyone else handle it? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's hard, especially when you're depressed and anxious and your thoughts aren't specifically like rational or,
Totally.
yeah, yeah.
And two, that thing that, I know we see clients do all the time of like rationalizing, like
Mm-hmm.
I have it so great. I had the best birth. I have
Mm-hmm.
the best baby. She's healthy and I have my family's here and my partner loves me. And why I
Right.
what do I have to complain about? That whole just toxic narrative.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's really rough. That is really rough. So, okay. Thank you. Yeah. I was curious about those dynamics, but that makes a lot of sense and sounds similar to my experience in some ways
Mm-hmm.
too. And what I hear a lot of other therapists struggle with is that
Mm-hmm.
feeling of like, I'm supposed to know. It's really, really hard. So you're what? Your daughter's how old before you go to have a second?
She was about 2 when I got pregnant with my second.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was right after she turned 2.
Mm-hmm.
And I was, and I also had my second by IVF a lot easier this time. And again, hugely fortunate that it worked right away.
Mm-hmm.
And also had, a problem-free pregnancy and like beautiful, amazing birth with her. I feel like I just won the lottery in that department both times.
Great.
And I, in that time I was working a lot. I was starting to see a lot more perinatal clients, again, kind of like really trying to just like study up and like learn as much as I could,
Mm-hmm.
go to the PSI conference and try to meet people online and, doing consultation groups about specifically this. So kind of really like filling my cup in that
Mm-hmm.
way.
Mm-hmm.
My oldest daughter was in preschool, so it was like kind of getting some separation from her. I was feeling much more just myself, who I always was. And, I pretty much bet on the fact that I would be depressed again the second time. I kind of
Yeah.
knew that that would happen. I did feel somewhat depressed during the pregnancy, but it was pretty manageable. But it just was really different. I came to the second postpartum period with a lot more information and just a lot more kind of validation in myself for
Yeah.
like what was normal. And I think part of that's just that it's the second time and it's like you kind of just know, okay,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to feel totally crazy for a little bit and I'm going to feel out of control in this way and breastfeeding is going to be hard in this way. And so maybe so I did struggle quite a bit after she was born, just adjusting. We were actually moving again, which was
Oh,
crazy timing. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
Just to a new house, but still a move. And I maybe like 3 or 4 weeks in just started was like, I don't feel good. So I just called my midwife, who I was pretty close with, and she and I had talked through my pregnancy a lot about my first experience. And I'd said,
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty much anticipating I'll be depressed. So she was also very much like following my lead, but I think this time my lead felt like more confident. And so I just called
Mm-hmm.
her and I was like, I'm going to need some Zoloft. And she was
Mm-hmm.
like, great. Okay. Got started on that. That helped quite a bit. Started seeing a therapist who I still see, who's just been completely amazing, and went back to work right away. And that was a huge, huge part of it. So, I mean, by right away, I mean around, I think, 10 or 12 weeks, I went back to work.
Mm-hmm.
And where that had felt so hard the first time, I think this time it was hard. It felt sad. I was missing my baby, but I was also like, I need this more than anything that I need.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And at that time, I was kind of going back to a practice that was pretty much starting to be not completely, but maybe like half to three-quarters focused on maternal mental health. So I wouldn't say that by the time I went back to work, I was necessarily struggling with postpartum depression, but it was close enough, it was fresh enough to really be very present. And I just feel like since then, so last 2.5 years or so, I've really continued to just be very focused in this field and in my community too. Worked to try to connect with a lot of other providers. I was the only therapist in Savannah who had this training before. Now
Oh,
I have a couple other therapists who've since gotten training that I work really closely with, and they're incredible. And
oh, that's
I
great.
feel like, yeah, I feel like we're trying to do just like a lot of, Savannah has got a long way to go in this department, but just trying to do like a lot of outreach to different community providers and educating people and informing people and just trying to like talk about this stuff more.
Yeah.
And
I'm an
I'd say
advocate
that,
real quick.
yeah, yeah, totally. And I'd say that that paired with just doing therapy with pregnant and postpartum women almost every day has been just so hugely healing to me,
Right.
just
Right.
on every level. And I think sometimes with that friend of mine who, asked, is this going to be really hard for you? And I feel like I wouldn't have known, but actually it has been like so much the opposite. Like, of course it's hard, but to be able to kind of sit with women who are like speaking to so many of the experiences or feelings or thoughts that I had, or even kind of sound similar,
Mm.
but they're, having the courage to show up and sit on the couch and talk about it and
Mm-hmm.
help themselves get better and do all of this work for themselves and their families, like, is just unbelievably inspiring,
Right.
healing to me. So it's ended up being the perfect thing for me
Oh,
in
that's
that
great.
way. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. It's so nice to be able to see people go through their own healing process especially when they can feel better and they don't know that yet.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, really cool. So while this is super healing on a lot of levels, I'm sure, like you had mentioned, there were some difficult parts. I think for, all the other therapists who are also getting into this field after going through this themselves, it could probably really resonate with the ways that it's difficult too. So if you wouldn't mind talking about some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, obviously anything that like we can connect to in our clients, stories of pain or suffering, like anything that sort of echoes things that we've been through, just can be sort of triggering. Like I think there have been times, especially working with women who are dealing with infertility, when they're unable to have a successful full-term pregnancy, has been just really painful, just deeply painful. And I feel like it would kind of feel, when I was sitting in session with people going through these things, it would almost feel as though it was sort of putting me back in that space that was
Oh,
just a
sure.
place that it was just like a place that I never want to go again. And so, trying to, as we do as therapists, locate our compassion, our empathy, try to kind of like read our own feelings as a way of supporting the client's feelings. It was just very challenging for me. And I think I would feel some kind of, almost like I'd create some distance between the client and me to
Yeah.
like almost compensate for that. I don't know that that was necessarily something that the client could perceive or pick up on, but it just didn't feel good to me because it's just not how I work.
Mm-hmm.
And then later, I think dealing with people who we're acutely postpartum, I think one thing it still is very challenging for me is I get really angry. I get
Mm-hmm.
really angry about their situations.
Yeah.
I get really angry about the lack of support, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
their family or their partner or their providers or whatever. I get real mad real fast about
Yeah,
it. And I realize, it's warranted a lot of the time. But
totally.
I also realize that it's a lot of the anger that I still have about what it was like for me.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, like I just still feel really angry. I think, I feel loads better. I feel really good, in fact, about where I am just as a professional, as a mom, as a maternal mental health provider, all of it. But if I think too deeply about just kind of like a lot of the details around my postpartum period in particular, I just get really angry. So I
Mm-hmm.
think on the one hand, it's useful because I think it helps me connect with my clients, but I
Mm-hmm.
think it's also been really challenging to kind of know how to keep that in check to just be with clients where they're at because
Mm-hmm.
they might not be angry, right? They might be grieving. They might be actually in that space of denial like I was. They might
Mm-hmm.
be anxious and my anger isn't sometimes is useful, sometimes is not going to be right. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that's just been hard to grapple with. And then just kind of knowing, after they leave and I'm kind of left with it and going about my life, like, how do I deal with that anger? Where do I put it? Because, I mean, there's just a lot to be angry about in the world, obviously, but in this work especially, it just really
Yeah.
it touches on a lot. And so I have to kind of constantly try to keep in check to like a sense of hopelessness or helplessness because
Right.
it's very easy to feel that way, especially just in terms of what's available to women in this community that I live in.
Sure. Right. You're holding those sort of like community and global perspectives at the same time that you're sitting with somebody in their kind of, not to say individual pain, but
Mhm.
the pain that one person is talking about in that moment.
Right, totally. I think, that's the thing is like just sort of recognizing that we can only be with like one person or family at a time. We can do all these other larger things, but like when it comes down to it, we just have to be with that person and what their experience is. I
Mm-hmm.
think that can be just hard to hold on to when the anger and also the grief comes into play.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
I don't know that I feel like that, as acutely about other things that are not maternal mental health. It's like
Oh,
this is
sure.
really this is really like the main kind of triggery passion for me. So
Yeah. I love
yeah.
that. I love that on so many levels and can fully resonate with it too. Yeah.
hmm
I get angry
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. I mean, and like, I believe in anger. Like, I think anger is
Mm-hmm.
actually really useful. And a lot of times with clients, they'll come in and they're like, I'm just so angry about all of this and I don't want to be. And I'm angry at my partner and my baby and my doctor, and my mom. And, I get it. Like, anger feels awful, but it's like really important to work with it, I think.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm really grateful that you're talking about this from the therapist perspective, in part because there are so many of us as therapists in this particular field who have gone through their own stuff to get them to the point of specializing. So, loads of us are out there also still doing therapy with people who are in pain. And sometimes we are in our own pain and in our own recovery as we're helping others. And that it is hard to balance that. It is a challenge to figure out like what's mine and what's theirs. But like for the people who aren't therapists who are listening, like that's our job. That's our job to
Right.
know what's ours and what's yours. And we can still hold both, which I
Yeah.
think is what's so beautiful about, when therapy's done well. We are getting our own support. Oftentimes, therapists go to therapy, newsflash. And, right. And we're getting our
They
own,
should.
they should, well,
Yeah.
hey,
Yeah.
that's a whole other episode.
Yeah.
But right. Yeah. We're still human, but part
Right.
of the work that we do is to hold both, is to be able to recognize that we may have some stuff that comes up in relation to our clients, but you explained it so beautifully that, how you manage that is part of the work.
Totally. I mean, I think that's part of our jobs, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
to take care of that so that we can show up for other people.
Yeah.
hmm
Yeah. Yeah. And some days are hard. Some days
Totally.
just are hard.
I also, like, I think in a lot of ways, since working in this field and with this population, like it's obviously kind of filled me up and fed me so much just personally.
Right.
But I also feel like because of my own experience and just, the different paths that's taken me down, like I actually really feel like it's made me a better therapist just generally.
Yeah.
Because I've had to kind of grapple with myself really, and my own blocks and demons and all of that. So.
Oh, right. I think it's true that if you've gone through it, you can show up in a different way, in a deeper way, even if the client isn't specifically, you're not telling them all about your own story really.
Right.
Unless it's clinically appropriate. Sometimes that does come out, but you get it in a way that, that people who aren't in the specialty don't.
Totally. Yeah.
Even if you're in the specialty and you haven't gone through it yourself, if you have like, enough training and you've heard enough stories, you can also understand this in a way that other people don't, other therapists don't.
Definitely. I mean, and two, I could just go down the whole road of, the things, not to say that all therapists who don't have this training are not equipped to handle this population, but I just have heard from clients so many of the well-intentioned but really damaging things that they've heard from other therapists who don't have this training when they go to them for support around perinatal issues. It's just really scary.
Yeah, I've heard it a lot. And I will say it's people who want to help this population should have specialized training. But because for the same reason I just heard you say, it does more damage. And also, I like me personally, this is actually like a soapbox issue, but we won't get into all of it today. I wouldn't treat addiction because that's not what I have training in.
Exactly.
That's just, I think it's just professionally really valuable and necessary to have adequate training. So yeah, I'll agree with you.
And I just think, the training obviously like enhances our clinical work, but I just feel like it's helped. Like I'm saying, it's just helped me so much in terms of understanding just all the kind of many aspects of motherhood that I never would have understood or anticipated.
Oh, before. Sure. Yeah. And even though your specific experience might not be the same as all of the clients that you are helping, because of your personal experience and additionally your training, you get it on so many levels. And if I might say, we are connected to a phenomenal group of people who also specialize. But like within the specialty, there are so many specialties, so we can consult people all the time as needed.
Yeah. That community of perinatal providers, though I'm connected through most of you just through the internet, has been like also just hugely helpful to me. Professionally and personally, partly because I've felt very isolated where I am in my city. So it's been just a great connection to have.
Yeah. When I think about the one individual client, like you said, that you're helping at a time, they're being supported by you or by any other trained therapist. And then that therapist is connected to support, and there's this whole network, and it just funnels down so beautifully into, helping the individual, because we have adequate support. Well, sometimes we don't, but we do have a lot of support resources available to us.
Totally. It's so true. And I feel like I've really benefited from that so much here. And also because I will say Georgia's chapter of PSI is so awesome and really kind of robust and active. And
that's great.
Early on when I first started, they're mostly based in Atlanta, so not too close to me. But when I first started training, I went to some trainings with them, and that group of women who's gotten that chapter really up and running amazingly has just been like such a huge source of support for me. So
that's great.
That's been great. Yeah.
That's fantastic. I think we're all a little bit angry, and that probably helps.
Yes, it does. I think it helps to just be around people who get it,
Right.
Who get why we should all be raging.
Right. We're angry, but we're also super compassionate and
yes, and patient and all that.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So what would you say to the therapist who is going through this right now and potentially specializing in this area as well? What would you say to them in terms of, what helped you get through, or hopeful messages for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously, like at the core of it is just to try to prioritize taking care of self. And, by that, I don't mean like self-care in terms of like getting massages or something, but like really, really taking care of just your feelings and what you're going through. I think that even though there can be a lot to be gained from working with this population, if you're going through it, I also just feel like it's really important, for all of us to always be like checking our boundaries and noticing if there are particular types of presenting issues, say, that are like just too much. Like I have a colleague who has a history of a lot of pregnancy loss and is still planning to continue to try to have children. And I know that she has felt like working with pregnancy loss is probably going to be too much for me right now.
Right, right.
And that's great. That's a totally fair and I think very important choice to make. And so I think just knowing that you don't have to extend yourself in any way that's actually going to harm you more, and that you can listen to yourself in that way to know, like, I need to step away from this, or I need to kind of get more education around this other issue that's going to help me feel more empowered, but just to really listen to yourself in that way, rather than those ideas that we all have of like what we should be doing as a therapist, or what we should be doing as a mom, or what we should be doing as a maternal mental health therapist.
Mm-hmm.
It's obviously like all so individual,
Mm-hmm.
that I just think that's really important to listen to. And then I think the other big piece of it is just to try to get as connected as possible with the perinatal mental health community, either with your local PSI chapter or group, or just with the larger organization, or going to the conference, or getting on the consultation call, or doing a training, just anything that will connect you with other providers who most likely get it and who've been through it. That's a huge thing.
Yeah, absolutely. All of that is just gold. I hope people who are suffering right now or going through it right now can really hear you. I love what you're saying about the boundaries and surrounding yourself with people who get it. That is extremely important. And as you were talking, you reminded me that there is a PMAD support for psychotherapists Facebook group that's closed and just for therapists who are going through this. So that is another option.
It's a great support group and just resource for people, that group.
Thank you so much, Bridget, for coming on and sharing your story and your path and your wisdom with us. I know that so many people will hear this and feel heard by you.
Thank you so much. I feel so honored to be here with you. Thanks.
Thank you so much again, Bridget, for coming on. This is a difficult topic for some people to talk about, but for those of us who are happy to talk about it, it is very useful for us in the field to hear about other people who are going through their own challenges. If you'd like to get connected to Bridget, find her at bridgetcrosslcsw.com or on Facebook. And you can also go to listentomoms.org. Take care, everybody out there. Stay safe. And until next time. Thank you so much for joining us today. Please share this podcast. Together we can support moms and families so that no one has to deal with this alone. Come connect with us at momandmind.com.